Okay, take two. Today's project is this dual fuel Champion 9000 peak watt, 8100 peak watt dual fuel generator. We recently had a 5-day power outage here. Now, I have a Honda EU 3000 generator, one of those super quiet, really nice inverter generators. The problem is that particular generator is only supplies 110 volts, unless I buy another one and join them together and buy this other flicky thing to create 100 or 220 volts. The Honda worked wonderfully. It ran perfectly for 5 days, non-stop. It performed above expectations, and it did enough for what I needed it to do. It ran a space heater, kept my wife's CPAP machine running. It was wonderful. The problem is my home and my garage are on separate meters, because, well, it was just the easiest way to get the most amount of power into my garage. So an unexpected consequence of doing that project was that my waste pump, see that pump right there? I have a pump grinder, a macerator pump grinder to pump the shit out of my house. Shit don't flow uphill, and I live at the bottom of a hill. So I went out and I purchased this generator because it produces 220 volts. I also have a transfer switch, which is another project in itself. But the biggest problem with this generator, and the problem with pretty much every single generator that isn't one of those super crazy quiet Honda jobbies, is this thing is ludicrously loud. So I have taken it upon myself to try to make this thing a little bit quieter. My plan is, and I've already actually started the project just because it was starting to do a video on it was an afterthought. So what I did was I've already removed the screws that hold this on. This actually comes off of the generator. To remove this, you only need to take off this and these two bolts. There's a bolt there, a bolt there, I'm sorry, a bolt there, and 2 bolts here. This thing's brand new. I ran it one time, and then the muffler comes right off. Now, I don't plan on making another muffler for this. Generators don't really make most of their noise from their exhaust. Yes, some are noisy exhaust-wise. The majority of the noise from a generator comes from the machine itself. It comes from the joint between the generator and the motor, and it comes from the actual mechanical workings of the engine. So I'm going to build an enclosure for it, which is also going to be part of this. But right now, if I build an enclosure, I'm going to need to get the exhaust from the generator out of the enclosure for cooling purposes, and you can't pump carbon monoxide into a space where you're operating something that breathes oxygen. That includes people. So, and engines, because that's how engines work. So what I've done was, or what I did was, I removed the spark arrestor, which is just a screen that goes over this. This is the flange that holds that screen in place. So that goes there. I then transferred this to my favorite famous paper template, and then I put the paper template, I drew the paper template onto here, and that fits that. Now this sheet metal is pretty heavy, hard stuff. To be honest with you, I don't know what gauge it is. I think it's like 10 gauge. Ironically, this is actually part of the cage assembly out of a police car. So it's pretty strong stuff. I don't know what the hardness is or what have you, but I'm pretty confident that this particular thickness of metal, which is right there. It's probably 1/16 of an inch, maybe a little bit less. I'm not really great with my sheet metal gauges, but I'm confidently sure that this particular material will be thick enough to support this piece of pipe, which I'm going to weld to the flange that I'm going to make right now. And I also plan on supporting this otherwise. The generator is mounted on rubber, so this cannot be hard mounted. This cannot be hard mounted anywhere except to the muffler itself. So it should keep it pretty stabilized. I plan on using a flex pipe to go from this piece of material to the other piece of material. Now plumbing is the bane of my existence. So it's 2 1/4 inch OD pipe. But this is the end I need. So, because this is bigger, this is like 2 and whatever the OD or ID is on this is actually 2 1/4. The OD on this is 2 1/4. ID on this is 2 1/4. So this is actually supposed to slide onto another pipe. I need this because this flange here is kind of, you can see it, it's kind of up. It's to deflect the exhaust away from the machine. So the problem is this end does not fit properly over this end here. Yes, I could heat this up. I could heat this up and I could push it down and I could make it flat with the surface. I don't want to do that for a couple of reasons. One is I don't feel like getting my torch out right now and carefully heating this and pushing it and bending it in. The other reason I don't want to do that is this flange fits perfectly against this flat. So if I make when I make the new flange, I don't want to damage this mating surface here. Even if I put a gasket of some form or another around it, it's still, I don't want to rely on a gasket. I'd rather have a nice tight metal fit. If it leaks a little, it leaks a little. Like I said, this is purely to get the exhaust fumes out of the shed that I'm going to build, the enclosure that I'm going to build for the generator. So the next step in the process is I need to measure this. So that's 12 inches. I'm going to say that it's probably 14 inches long. I want these holes, these slots here, because the next part of the process is I'm going to cut a piece of wood this length, a 2x4, and I'm going to mount it in the vise. And then I'm going to use this 2 1/4 inch hole saw to drill out the center of the flange. If I don't do that, if I don't mount this on a piece of wood while I'm using the hole saw, 30 years of experience has taught me is the second that this hole saw catches, this thing's going to turn into like swinging, flying razor blades. It's much better if when you're drilling, doing what I'm doing, which is actually creating the hole to make this, it's always better to mount this on something. I should do it in a drill press, but my drill press is buried and I don't feel like doing it. And actually, I don't think, my drill press is so small and crappy, I don't think it would fit in there anyway. And I don't feel like trimming this any more than I have to. This stuff is hard, very, very difficult to cut. I've cut it before. I think it might actually be hardened in some way. It's harder than normal sheet metal. That much I do know, because I've used this material on several different projects and it's worked out really well. Like I said, I was converting Crown Victoria police cars, or I was actually decommissioning Crown Victoria police cars. So this is part of the shield assembly that protects the police officer from this shitum in the back. So I'm going to mount the piece of plywood. I'm going to mount the piece of wood on here. I got to trim it first. I'm going to mount it on there, and then I'll get back. Alrighty. So I mounted my 2x4 here, my piece of metal. I didn't cut it. I was going to cut it, but I'm kind of cheap, and this is a nice length of wood. So I'm going to put. These are purely to keep it from turning into flying guillotines. Yeah, my battery's dying, of course. I bought this years ago. This is a Mac Tools 1/4-inch driver. It's great, lithium ion, awesome. Batteries die so fast anymore. It's just getting old. Now, that'll keep it from flying off and killing me, or at least seriously injuring myself. Plug in. Oh well. So I have my drill. I know this isn't a Milwaukee hole shooter, but this is more than enough to hurt me. Actually, you know what? I'm going to pilot drill that first. There we go. Now, you probably can't see in the video because of the crappy camera, but this hole is nowhere near round. But what it does is it fits pretty nicely in here. I might actually even just weld it like this. I'm not sure. I haven't decided yet. So if one's good, two is better. So I'm going to take my handy dandy template here and then make a decision where I'm going to make the next one from. I think it's going to be right here just because it's the only place to put it. I don't really need to do this. Actually, if anything, it's just a little frustrating because then you see where your holes aren't really as round as they need to be or should be. This doesn't need to be round either, by the way. Well, yeah, it probably should be round. I mean, it could be kind of triangular. The outside diameter isn't really as important. I'm probably going to go a little bigger, but not by a whole lot. I just kind of want to give a basic idea where it needs to be. Okay. I'm going to center punch it as close to the center as I can. Drill my pilot hole again. This drill bit is brand new. Well, it's not brand new. It was recently sharpened. That just lets me know how hard this stuff is. It's probably too hard for what I'm doing, but oh well. I've used it in the past for other projects, and it's worked out pretty well. Oh, nothing like metal filings to get into the washing machine and ruin your wife's clothes. Notice I'm not wearing my goofy suit. This is another problem with hole saws, is they really don't fit well. And if I was doing this, in an important way, I would probably do this on a mill with a flying cutter. But I don't have a mill, and this will work. Isn't that noise lovely? Look at that. Now, my pilot came out. Oops. Now, I fix that. Oh, look at that screwdriver right there. It didn't come out just a little bit. It almost flew completely apart. This set of hole saws I purchased in probably probably 1994, maybe even longer ago than that. When I was in my first life as an auto body repairman, used to be that you would get parts from manufacturers that didn't have holes. Like, some of them didn't even have like turn signal holes. You know, I bought this to drill antenna holes with back when cars still had antennas. That's how old I am. What an awful hole. Jeez. What is the problem here? Oh, that's the problem. This isn't the right drill bit for this project. The actual pilot for this thing snapped off probably 20 years ago. So it's just a drill bit. I should probably grind a flat spot in it. I use these so infrequently. Alright, well, this one's going to be probably completely unusable. The hole, the flange on the hole is, I mean, I might be able to use it. I'm going to be using a TIG welder to weld this together, so this is probably the one I'm going to use. I'm going to make both of them just in case. But I think this one's a waste. Now, we'll take it apart. There's my hole. There's where that wants to go in. It actually wants to go in like that. So what I'm going to have to do is, oh, you know what? This one might work. So which one fits better? So this is the flange. So that's going to be like that. I'm going to have to hog the hole out a little bit. This one might, the one that I said might not be useful, might actually be more useful than the than this one. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Now the next trick's going to be cutting this without killing myself or seriously injuring myself. I wish I had a bandsaw with a metal cutting blade on it, which I have a bandsaw, but I don't have a metal cutting blade, and I'm not going to change the blade over because I can't find the metal cutting blade that's the correct length without making it for my saw. No. Next step is to get the jigsaw out. Now, hopefully that's a little bit better of an angle, so my fat arm isn't hiding what I'm doing. So I switched out my handy dandy cheapo jigsaw here. So I don't know what that thing does. It changes the angle of the blade, but I haven't figured out exactly what good it is for cutting metal. I've been using a jigsaw like this to cut metal for years. This actual piece of metal has been cut with this jigsaw several times. I have air nibblers. I've got the Whizzy wheel, the carborundum cutting wheels, they make too many sparks, and it just doesn't. It's hard to cut a circle with one of those things. So I'm going to use the jigsaw. I'm going to cut one piece off, and then so I have a little bit easier thing to hold on to. This is a medium metal blade. It's relatively new. I did a little test cut already, so made sure it wasn't dull or it was actually going to cut. So I'm going to give it a shot. I'm actually going to put hearing protection in, and then I might figure out how to fast forward the cutting. In my last video, I had a lot of unnecessary noise and cutting noises. So I'm going to probably do that. So we'll try to cut this out without. Well, try to make a circle out of it. I know I could make a circle cutter, which is probably what I should have done to start with, but I wanted to drill these first because it's easier to deal with a larger piece of metal. You saw me fighting with the hole saw. I knew it was going to happen, so let's try it this way. And so yeah, I'm wearing gloves because I don't want splinters in my fingers, but the irony of me and all of my gloves is the one spot right there, and every one of my gloves is ripped out because these are cheap Harbor Freight gloves. They're cheap gloves. They're not the good ones. They have cloth in them and they melt. They're kind of shitty gloves. The good ones are $50 a pair. Oh, that didn't cut too bad. Let's set that aside. That ain't too bad. See, got me. The rest I can trim off with another tool, or I could fight with this a little bit more. I'm gonna cut this one. Nothing like a face full of metal filings. This thing's gonna kill me. It all went crazy. Alright, so I'm going to use the wiggle it till it falls off method. Oh, there we go. So I think what I'll do is I'll put a clamp on it here, maybe if I can, and then cut the rest off because it's flopping around too much. I knew that was going to happen. Now, hopefully there'll be enough room between the saw blade, the shoe of the saw, and this. Is it on camera? Oh, just barely. There we go. That's better. Cutting circles has always been a kind of like a, I don't want to say a mystery to me. I know how to do it, but I've always had trouble getting them round. Part of my cutting problem here is I'm trying to make the saw cut at a greater of a distance than the width of the blade will allow. So kind of have to trim it that way. I'm pretty close on that one, so I'm going to probably clean the rest up on a, I'm not going to clean the rest of this up on just a bench grinder. I think I'll knock this little tit off the end here, and then I'll go to the bench grinder. It's cutting much nicer now that I'm clamping the tool. Clamping stuff makes things a lot easier. Clamping ain't that great, but it's better than holding it and fighting with it and juggling it and waiting to cut my finger off. These cuts would probably go a little easier if I was using some kind of cutting lubricant, a soup or even WD-40, which works great. But to be quite honest, I don't want to get WD-40 and cutting oil all over this bench. I like this bench. My other bench over there is my sloppy bench, and sloppy bench is covered with other crap because I can't seem to get my shit together at any given moment. Well, that came out a little bit nicer. Okay. I'm not going to bother with that one. Well, now I just need to just compare it against our... This is the template that I used. This metal template's a little nicer. Yeah, it's not bad. I've made worse. I do think I'm going to darken the line up a little bit just so I can see it. Darken this line up. Remind me where my cut is. I really like these magic markers. These are probably just Sharpies, but they seem to be a little bit nicer than Sharpies. Oops, I'm sure they came off a patent somewhere, or patent or whatever. So address that line up. Now I didn't mark the holes because I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do with the holes. And then I'll do the same thing to this one. And then my bench grinder's over behind me, so I don't feel like moving the camera, so I don't think you need to see somebody running a bench grinder. Probably didn't need to see somebody running a skill saw or a junky old jigsaw, which that actually could have got funny. Nothing funnier than when the jigsaw catches something and flings it all over the bench. Alright, over to the bench grinder. Okay, so I saved you from the grinding process. They're not really crazy, they're not perfectly round. I don't expect them to be. This isn't for somebody else, this is for me, so government work. So I have two of them. Interesting thing I just noticed, and it's not anything to do with anything really, but I just noticed that the flange actually fits perfectly over this, which is great, except it creates a little bit of a problem when I go to put that on, I think. So, because this slides perfectly over the flange and gives me some room to fiddle with it a little bit. So I think what I'm going to end up doing is, I know what I'm going to end up doing. So this can get set aside. I'm going to very carefully trim these holes, or trim the hole, so that the flange, I need the flange to sit almost perfectly around the pipe, for two reasons. One is, the tighter your joint is, it's actually perfect. if I was going to do it that way. There's two reasons to do that. One is you want the absolutely tightest joint you possibly can get when you're TIG welding. I don't have a MIG welder. Actually, I know it's weird to have a TIG and not a MIG. I bought the TIG welder when I was working in a body shop for my own personal use for welding aluminum and stuff like that. And I always used the shop welder to do any of the other welding that I was doing. I bought the TIG welder as kind of a present to myself when my dad died. So all I have is a TIG, which makes really beautiful welds, but the problem is you have to be a really good welder and you really have to know what you're doing. Hopefully I can set this whole rig up with a lens so we can get the welding process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just I'm going to bevel this edge just a tiny bit, and then I'm going to make this hole just a little. Ow! I'm starting to have short arms. I can't quite always see stuff, so see me do this a lot. Now I'm going to make that so it fits a little bit better right around there. Yeah, I'm going to fit that real quick. Interesting side note, everybody laughs at me because I have, I bought these at Harbor Freight for, I think, $9 a piece. The air tool itself was $9 a piece. This bit's $20. So what I did was I bought like, I don't know, 10 of these, and I never changed the bits. I just leave them in the tool. And the Harbor Freight ones work great. I used them professionally for years. If you're changing out every once in all the time, you're using the same machine over and over and over again, and you're wasting time changing bits. And I don't waste time changing bits. I saw a guy on TV do it, and I thought it was hilarious. And that's really great. That's something that I want to do. My other little grinder. This little monster, I bought this from Mac too. This thing will kill you. It's the most powerful little air tool I've ever owned. But it's great for doing little tiny stuff if you can control it. It gets out of hand real quick. Oh, and the stones are ludicrously expensive. If you're not using the grinder to grind stuff with, you can use it to pull your bench off with. It's crazy. I'm just going to take some of this sticker off. Actually, I'm probably going to use a razor blade for that. I don't want to damage the coating that's on this pipe too awfully much. You know, that's almost golden. Hate that. Never buy cheap air fittings. Always buy good ones. These are old, but they go bad really quick. Both ends go bad real quick. That's the one thing I won't buy from Harbor Freight is their ends, because they leak. Just do this real quick. Always wear your safety glasses, kids. There's nothing like getting your head clamped into a vise like it's a Clockwork Orange and then having somebody drill your eye out. That's always fun. Should probably be wearing gloves too. Oh, and another little... I don't know if you can see my shirt. It's covered with metal filings. I mentioned it before. Oh, and this will kill you too if you're not careful. these things fling little tiny shards of, or little tiny filings of metal everywhere, and they stick in everything. Countless cigarette pockets in my shirts have it in there, and rubs on my nipple and it bothers me. Interesting note too, this is a specific carbide for cutting steel. They cut better the faster they run. As long as you don't push on them too hard, you're golden. You just let the tool dance around it. If you try to really force it, it'll catch and be a mess. I think my amateur opinion here is that this is going to be just fine. Let's see if I can tilt it a little bit. No. Yeah. Let's see. This vise doesn't go this way. Alright. Hopefully the camera will focus. I'll give it a second. So this now fits. Ironically, this is the one that I cut that it didn't cut right. So I've got this fitting almost as perfectly as I'm ever going to get it. I have this one too. They both kind of have this nasty burr lip on it. That's just the nature of using a hole saw when I should have been using a different tool. So that fits perfectly enough for what I'm doing right on that flange. This fits perfectly on that. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to whip out my TIG welder, and I'm going to, well, actually, I'm going to drill holes. I have to, that's a vitally important part of this, I guess I should have mentioned. So this muffler oriented on the machine, so this is the inlet. When I put this machine in its container, or in its enclosure, I need to make sure that I have this oriented properly. I think I'm going to do it about 10:30, 11 o'clock, because this is going to have a piece of flex pipe on it coming off. This has to be able to move independently. Where this is hard mounted, we'll have to be able to move somewhat independently from the muffler, which is mounted in rubber. The other option is when I mount this, I mount it on something that's flexible. I'll have to figure that out. I haven't got that far yet. All of my engineering is done on the fly. My father had a colloquialism for the way I engineer things. Okay, a little bit better camera angle, and I'm still having camera problems. I have to break down and buy a real video camera. So I'm using a Motorola phone that I had laying around left over. It takes pretty good video, but it's not that great. So here's my flange. I put witness marks where the holes are. Yeah, I know it's not round, but like I said, it doesn't really, I don't think it's going to affect it. What I'll do probably is get some, I have some fiberglass tape, and I'll make a gasket for it to tighten up. Then here's my holes, which are in my template. There's the witness marks, there's the holes, and then hopefully that'll work. So I'm going to move this out of the way. My board back for drilling into. My handy dandy center punch. If you're not familiar with drilling holes, which most people are, if you're watching this video, you should know how to drill a hole. Anyway. Center punch it. Center punch it. Center punch it. I'm pretty much convinced that I'm going to have to make these holes. I'm going to have to hog these holes out. No matter how many times I have tried to drill holes in the right spot, I inevitably drill them in the wrong spot. You should probably wear hearing protection when using an air drill. Yeah, flying razor blades. Clamp I was touting earlier. I should just use that. My leaky air hose. And once again, like I said, if I probably put a drop of WD-40 on here or something, it would probably cut those holes a little better. But because I'm welding it shortly, I don't want to. It's only 3 holes. It's not that thick. It is hard. Okay. Now, unplug that. Now I can be disappointed that this doesn't fit properly. Shockingly, it looks like they're going to fit. Now, let's see. Now, these are the screws that came with the spark arrestor, that held the spark arrestor on originally. I'm probably just going to reuse them if I can. I think they're long enough. Just put these in here real quick to make sure everything lines up the way I want it to. What I'm going to do after I get this bolted down or screwed in, he's screwed in enough for what I want to do, is I'm going to then put the pipe on it. So I might reset the camera angle, but I'm going to put the pipe on, and yeah, see that one doesn't quite line up. Yeah, that one doesn't line up. And that one doesn't line up. Okay, well, that's par for the course. I had a feeling that that was going to happen. So what I'm going to do is, these holes are like perfectly the same exact size that the screws are. And I should have known better. I'm just going to make the holes a little bit bigger. I switched out drill bits. The original holes were 3/16. I keep 3/16 chucked up in that drill all the time. That's another one. Those air drills were $9 a piece. So I bought like 4 of them. And I keep standard size holes, or standard size drill bits. I keep in those 1/8 inch, 3/16 and a quarter. Sometimes a quarter. I have 3. The other one has a step bit in it, which I'm not going to use right this second. So, yeah, this is going to just make the hole a little bigger. This is a 7/32, or 15, 7/32. Just check the hole against the screw real quick. I have a feeling this isn't going to be quite big enough. It's a little sloppy. I am going to go one bit larger. Whoops, chaos. I probably should have just drilled them at 1/4 to begin with, but I don't want it to be too big. Yeah, good. It's nice and sloppy now, which is kind of what I wanted. Put the muffler back up on there. Rearrange my camera shot a little bit. There we go. Perfect. So, there's little burrs on the things. I'll take care of that in a minute. A smart person would have marked this outside. So I have a most peculiar feeling that this, while I will admit that my holes are probably not correct. I have the most peculiar feeling that these only go one way, which doesn't surprise me a bit. So there's some guy in China right now laughing his ass off. Oh, there we go. Oh, not quite. Let's see. I'll spin it one more time. Yeah, that's... Yeah, I still have one of these holes off a little. Hopefully that won't affect it too much. This is the story of pretty much every project I ever do. Yeah, that's way off. That's even further off. That's nowhere near close. And that's nowhere near close either. So it's this side. Yeah, that's going to be as good as it gets. I can hog the bottom of this out a little bit to get the hole to line up better. So I'm going to use my head and put another witness mark here and here, and I'm going to mark this out. So I think what I might try to do here to get this to line up just a tiny bit better is I might take a little tiny bit out of here. And I knew doing this that it wasn't going to be quite right anyway, even with a pattern. Either that or I just, yeah, this hole is the one that's off also. So these, there's nuts welded to the inside of this that I want to use. I could, if I really was ambitious, I could drill additional holes and put beefier nuts in there, but I don't think that's really necessary for this. There's not going to be a whole ton of stress on it. I don't plan on hanging the machine from this at all. So let's just see if I can make this hole a little bigger and then catch the drill bit and cut my hand. I'm sure there's a machinist somewhere crying watching me do this, but he'll get over it. Yeah, that didn't work all that great. I think I took a little too much off of that one. Oops. No big deal. Like I said, this is government work. Line my witness mark up. Witness mark. Alright, let's see if we can get the screws to go in this time. And the other thing is I can always put a little bit bigger washer behind this to hold it in place. That wouldn't go against the rules to put a little bit wider washer. There's lock washers on these, so I don't think this is ever going to tighten down without it. This screwdriver isn't great for this. Alright, look at that. The other funny thing is, or the other thing I'm pretty sure is, that these screws are probably metric. This thing's from China. The generator's, I think, Chinese made. I'm pretty sure it's Chinese made. If the generator's not Chinese made, the damn parts are. Okay, so now we're back to where we were. Now, I know that this is the orientation of the muffler on the machine itself. So this end here, let's see if I can get a wider shot. Yeah, that'll work. Okay, so this is the orientation of the muffler on the machine. So this is the front of the machine. This is the top of the muffler. This is the bottom of the muffler. And this is the pipe that I need to install. So I kind of have an idea where I'm going to put this. Oh, look at those little sharp bastards. I have a pretty decent idea how I'm going to mount this in the enclosure that I'm going to build. So I know that I want this pipe, which is about the correct length, to clear the generator, clear the generator case. So I should probably tilt this up a little bit I should probably tilt this up a little, which I am going to do. I think right about that is the way I want it to be. It's up a little. If I have to, I'm going to put a cap on the end of this pipe once it exits the generator shed. So next thing I'm going to do is kind of see if I can get this lined up nice. If I had a MIG welder, which I don't, I would put a couple tack welds on this. I'd be done with it. I'd take it off. I'd put a couple tack welds on it. I would take it off, flip it over, and weld the flange from the inside. I don't have a MIG welder. I have a TIG welder. I've explained that before. I could tack this with the TIG welder. I don't think I'm going to do that, though. I don't think I'm going to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some more witness marks on it. On the pipe itself. So that's how it's going to get lined up. And then I'm going to break all this down and I'm going to set up for a weld. Alright, I tacked this on. I'm going to put a little bit of the video in of me trying to show you what the weld process looked like through the lens. It didn't work. That's hot. I didn't expect it to. So what I'm using here is a TIG welder. It's TIG is tungsten inert gas. So real basic quick TIG is you have a tungsten electrode, a ceramic cup. Inside of this wire here flows both electricity and gas. You're never actually contacting the material that you're welding, never actually contacts this piece here. It's used for high-end welding, stainless. I'm using it for just cheap steel right now. But it provides a much nicer, cleaner, better penetrating weld than you would normally get with, we'll say, a MIG welder or an arc welder. It's a very clean and quiet and elegant process. I prefer, if given my druthers, if I'm going to weld something, I have the ability to weld whatever it is I'm welding in a comfortable manner and the parts fit well, I will always use the TIG welder. You can't see, I'll show up or pick it up. I have a foot pedal here that controls the amount of amperage that goes through the electrode. Right now my machine is set for 50 amps, which is way more than enough to weld this material and get good penetration. I'm using just a mild steel welding rod. I forget the number. Every one of these has a number, every different type of material. You can use a coat hanger on this stuff because it's pretty cheap, shitty material. I should be wearing gloves. I'm not wearing gloves, and there's always a good possibility if I touch the electrode to the work surface, or if I touch the electrode to the welding rod, which I'm actually dipping in. You can look up TIG welding. People have shot much better videos than I can with TIG welding. So yeah, the short of it is if I touch this to this and I'm holding one of these two and I'm grounded, it's a shocking experience. I like TIG welding because it doesn't throw a lot of sparks also, so I can weld here on this table full of trash. Probably should move that though, and not create a lot of chaos. I just like it. I mean, it's cool. I bought it years ago. This process is actually very quiet. Aluminum uses AC welding, or uses AC current, which is very noisy. It's kind of weird. It's like, it actually hurts your ears after a while. Now, my welder is not a I don't want to say it's not a commercial grade welder. It's a toy. It's a precision MIG 185. If I was doing a lot of serious heavy stainless or actually aluminum welding, I would probably have a liquid cooled torch, because this torch gets really hot after a couple minutes of any welding, aluminum especially. So I'm going to just knock this out real quick. You can't see it. I can. Well, you can't see me because there's a shade over the lens of the camera. I was attempting to get a really decent shot of the weld. I don't think that's going to happen. I just don't feel like fiddling with it. I have additional shades, but they're really not working the way I want them to. So I'm just going to do a couple little tack welds in here, and then I'm probably not going to film the rest of the welding process just because it's not turning out the way I want it to. So I'm just going to be a couple quick ones. check this to make sure it's straight. It's not perfect, but like I said, it's going to get a gasket of some kind. I just haven't decided what I'm going to put on it yet. One of these days, I'm going to get one of these that doesn't coil itself up. Well, that's pretty much welded up. Okay, so darn it, I don't have a light. You know what? I got all the light in the world. Pretty much done welding it. Oops. Pretty much done welding it up. So there's the internal weld. That's not that great. I'm going to have to clean... Ooh, it's still hot. I'm going to have to clean that up a little bit with a grinder, but this is what I was going for. This is where the bit kind of wobbled and it didn't fit right, so I had to put filler rod in here, which I try not to do whenever I TIG weld. I try to weld the material right into itself. It looks like I got pretty decent penetration all the way around. Good enough for what I'm doing. This isn't a nuclear reactor. This is it's an exhaust pipe for my generator, which isn't going to be, is always going to be live outside. It's not like I'm really worried about the exhaust gases escaping and causing a problem. By the time the exhaust gas gets to the muffler, it's already started to cool for the most part. It's not crazy hot. I've welded exhaust pipes and down tubes for turbochargers that glow cherry red. So those you have to kind of be careful with, but this will be fine. Now I'm going to just take a grinder real quick, my little nasty grinder, and clean that up, and then we're going to bolt it together and see how it fits. Looks like I missed a hole. That's why I didn't shut the welder off. There's always one spot I miss. Hey, always make sure your ground clamp is attached, or else you get fireworks. Remember to turn the gas back on. Ain't got no gas. The welder does not work without argon. Oh, isn't that much nicer? Let's see if it fits. be shocked if it fits first try. Ugh. Well, that's a good sign. I may have spoke too soon. I'm not exactly sure why that doesn't want to go in. Definitely something wrong with the hole. Let's start that one first then. The other bugaboo is this hole is going to be hard to get a screw in. Worked. Oh, where did I put the screw? Oh, there it is. Look at that. Ta-da! Now this is just a temporary test fit, but I think I've effectively created an extended exhaust pipe for my generator. And looking at the seam, I think if I use a bigger screwdriver, I think that'll tighten up nicely. Now, I could have welded this actually if I wanted to. And I still could if it leaks so bad that I can't fix it with a gasket. But I said, I really don't want to do that. I want to be able to, I don't want to modify the generator in a way that I can't put it back to the way it's supposed to be. Oh, pretty proud of myself. Next step. Okay, so back in another day, I've got my serial killer outfit on. I threw some paint on this. I'm not worried about rusting. This, where I welded it and made all the parts, I was worried about it rusting. I have an engineering oopsie, which is normal for me. I go with that lighter fluid again. I forgot to take into consideration that this piece goes on first, then this piece goes on. The spark arrestor goes on. The problem is this doesn't fit over that. The spark arrestor came out, but this won't go in. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to feed this through here. Take this off here. Feed this through here. I haven't tried this yet, so this might be interesting. Feed that through there. Put that on there. And then hope I can get to the screws in there. I took the spark arrestor off with this in place when I started. Yeah, it looks like I'll be okay. I'm not going to put a gasket on it right now I've got a storm rolling in, the fourth nor'easter of the season. It's the middle of March. That's wonderful. It's the middle of March, so if you're not familiar with weather in Northeast, especially outside of outside of Philadelphia, the weather can go south here relatively quickly. If it snows, when it snows, it's going to be heavy, it's going to be wet. The 5-day power outage was just a couple days ago at the beginning of March or end of February, and kind of screwed everything up. It went, it goes away relatively quickly, but it's still irritating those couple days when you're kind of buried in wet, heavy snow that you don't want to shovel. So I'm throwing it back together because I may have to take it, but I may have to take it apart, but I might not have to. So it's kind of a gamble. I'm using my appropriate screwdriver again, just because I have it handy, and it's slightly magnetized. It's an interesting side note. For whatever reason, whenever I weld on this, there's a reason. Every time I weld on this bench, in this vise, everything on the table gets magnetized. Now that I said that, it'll fall off. Nope. How the fuck do magnets work? These screws are actually, they're kind of the Chinese straight screws / Phillips head screws, which, shockingly enough, for somebody who is a mechanic for so long, I don't have very many good straight screwdrivers. I got turned into pry bars long ago. It looks like that worked out. If you made it this far in the video, I do have a question if anybody wants to answer, which would be, what kind of video camera should I get? Because my phone is not really working out the way I wanted it to. It shoots okay video, but it only has so much storage space. Oops. I have a very expensive DSLR, which I'm not going to use in the garage here because I don't want to use it in the garage. I've actually also got very expensive mirrorless cameras. Really nice Fuji X Pro 1, but it doesn't have an external microphone input, so I use that for B-roll, or I was using it for B-roll, and I got a little frustrated with it, cutting it all together and syncing the sound. And I'm not a videographer, I'm a photographer, an old film guy actually. So this is going together exactly how I wanted it to so far. These little magnetic trays here. I'm sure I'll lose a bolt somewhere. I guess I should point this out that there's 3 different length screws, which I hadn't realized until just now. These are big ones. These mount the unit, the muffler itself to the. They mount the muffler to the machine, and then these, which I just realized are all different sizes. Didn't realize that taking them out. That's a classic Fez faux pas. Wow, they're just like nominally longer. Huh. when I was working in the body shop, I tried to keep all my screws, nuts, and bolts all straight, because if you don't, when you go to put a car back together, the chances of you screwing it up are exponentially better. This is definitely an oopsie on my part. I guess my goal here this second is to figure out which ones are the right length and where those would go. With my luck, actually, there's 6 that hold it in the top and 8 that hold it on the sides. So, oh, it's just going to be a matter of time before I spill all these on the floor. And then, as you can see from the organization in my shop, chances are that I'm going to lose one forever. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I've got none left over. Well, that's just fucking hilarious. So, I'm going to have to assume... I'm holding on to this because it's going to dump. So, I have 5 that are longer than the rest. So, that's just flat out interesting. They're not much longer. They're only, if you're into the mesh, they're like 1/8 of an inch longer. That's those 5, or 1/8 of an inch longer than all the rest. So that's really weird. Now, I'm going to assume, you know what happens when you assume. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, that just doesn't make any sense. Wonder if maybe Mr. Chang had leftover bolts that were a little longer. Some engineer somewhere figured it was a good idea to make these a different length for some reason. Now, I'm going to put all these in and figure that out, and then we'll put this back on the machine. Mystery solved. Mystery solved. The longer bolts, I didn't realize it until just now when I flipped the unit over here, or flipped this thing over. The longer screws that I was just complaining about, they actually go in this thing. They go to hold the top. There's another heat shield guard that goes on top of here, and I didn't realize it at the time when I did it that there's only 5 of these. So there's the explanation of why there's 5 bolts that are literally like 1/8 or 1/16 of an inch longer than the rest of them. So I have to assume that those 5 go in here. Why? A mystery of engineering. I'm sure somebody somewhere knows why. So that's the answer to that. Makes me feel better. I thought it was because these don't fit right, because the sheet metal is kind of a little cattywampy. but it's definitely, there's 5 of those that are longer, then that's where they go. Okay, we're back. I'm back at it. Oh, let's see here. You know, between the cylinder head and the exhaust pipe is this little lead gasket. Which I shouldn't have disturbed. Be very careful with that, because they break, they snap like graham crackers. I don't know if you get it. It's right there. So there's 2 studs sticking out of the cylinder head that accept the exhaust pipe, and that goes like this. Be nice if I had my bolts. And then there's 2 bolts here. There's one here. Oh, I can't do it with one hand. I'm gonna put these bolts in first. Let's try this one. And the cam accentuates my bald spot. Let's try this one. For whatever reason, they don't want to start now. Oh, there we go. Oh, story of my life. There we go. Oh, no, cross-threaded. Okay. Oh, it's not cross-threaded. Good. You want to be careful starting any bolts into aluminum, especially steel bolts into aluminum, because chances of you cross-threading it. If they came out by hand, they should go in by hand. You should never have to force a bolt back into a hole, especially after you took it off with no problem. So we'll start those. Let's see. I'll lower the camera a little. And it's going to be at a funky angle, but that's what it's going to be. Now the other 2 are all the way up here. Now, cylinder heads have heating and cooling cycles. They get very hot and they get very cold. So the nuts that hold this, the exhaust assembly, have a flat washer and a lock washer. Flat washer goes on first. Lock washer goes on second. And then the nut goes on. Once again, start it by hand. I am very guilty of using power tools for things I shouldn't, but every once in a while I'll have a moment of clarity when it comes to doing that. Spark plugs are a great way to screw things up. That goes in there. That goes there. This machine is made in China, I'm assuming. It's all metric. So, whip out our handy 13mm socket. Now, tighten that down till snug. I should probably have a torque wrench for this. But I have this really cool ratchet I bought from Snap-on years ago, and it flexes when it's, and I can feel it in my hand when it flexes that I know it's tight. You can also watch the lock washer, the split washer, will flatten out, so you know that it's tight. Now you can very easily over tighten one of those. Oh, that doesn't work. And like over flatten it and force it out, which I've done. I was pretty famous for doing that when putting bumpers together. The lock washer would come completely apart and come out of the hole if you're using a heavy duty, impact gun or something way bigger than you need to for a job. Ugh. Well, I don't want those to be overly tight. I don't want to snap that stud off in the head of a brand new vehicle. That's about tight. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to tighten these up. And these are 10s, of course. If I did this right, there's inspection marks on the bolts. Hey, look at that. It lines right up with the existing inspection bolt, or inspection mark. So I know, or at least in my head, I like to think, I'm smart enough, that that's as tight as it's supposed to be. Now that those bolts line back up. Now I'm going to put this cover back on using the slightly longer screws that are bolts that I took out, because there's 5 of those and there's 5 of these holes to accept them. Now, I'm not going to start this. I'm relatively confident that it's going to leak out of there. And this project is just beginning. This is part 1 of what's going to probably be a several-part series of videos, because my videos are too long to begin with. Explain the next part of the process of how I'm going to move this, how I'm going to tie it into my garage, and how I'm going to distribute the power. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that this generator is purely to power this garage, and really at the end of the day it's purely to power this garage for an hour every once in a while during a major power outage to get my macerator pump to work, so I don't end up with sewage in my basement, which really would be an unpleasant experience. I've never had it happen, but there's a first time for everything, and that's something that I don't want to have a first time experience with. It's pretty unnerving when you have to count your pumps. I'm sorry, when you have to count your flushes. Another Mac Tool special here. I don't buy everything from Snap-on, but most of it came from Snap-on. At least my hand tools. Nothing like rounding off the head of the bolt. Well, that's it. We're good to go. And it worked exactly the way I intended it to, shockingly. So, this is now an extension for my exhaust pipe. And the next step for me with this process, the next step for this is going to be to get a flexible pipe to add to this so I can run it to outside of this building or outside of whatever structure enclosure I decide for the generator. Well, we'll see when I decide what I'm going to do with the rest of it.